Hi, everybody. Good evening, and thank you all for being here. I'm Alex Giannini from the Westport Library, and I have been impatiently waiting for tonight's event for a few months now. So let's get right to it. Philip Fracassi is the author of the award-winning story collection Behold the Void, which won Best Collection of the Year from both This Is Horror and Strange Aeons magazine. His new collection, Beneath a Pale Sky, is out now, and it is a must-read. Philip's stories have been published in numerous magazines and anthologies, including Best Horror of the Year, Nightmare Magazine, Black Static, Dark Discovery, Cemetery Dance, and others. Beneath a Pale Sky collects 8 stories of horror, including 2 original novelettes that will take you from the high security ward of a mental hospital to the top of a Ferris wheel on an ocean pier. These stories will bury you in the rubble of an earthquake, pull back the veil on a soul's journey into the afterlife, and turn a small Midwestern town into the secret domain of cross-dimensional gods. Combining old school horror with the modern weird, Beneath the Pale Sky will take you places you've never been before, and show you sights you won't soon forget. Friend of the library and best-selling author Christopher Golden says, Fracassi draws you in with a hand as sure as the tap of an orchestra conductor's baton. The stories in Beneath the Pale Sky are elegant, unsettling, and beautifully wrought. One of the best collections I've read in a long while. And speaking of friends of the library, John Palisano's nonfiction, short fiction, poetry, and novels have appeared in literary anthologies and magazines such as Cemetery Dance, Fangoria, Weird Tales, Space and Time, Schmoop, did I get it? University, and many more. He won the Bram Stoker Award for Excellence in Short Fiction in 2016 and is currently serving as president of the Horror Writers Association. John has a bunch of books available right now, including Dust of the Dead, Ghost Heart, which is now available in a gorgeous hardcover edition, Nerves, Starlight Drive, 4 Halloween Tales, and his first short fiction collection, All That Withers. John is awesome, Philip is awesome, and we thank them both for being here. So guys, take it away.
Thanks. And Alex, you're awesome too. And thank you so much for being here. Um, Philip, how are you? How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you, John. Yeah, feeling good. Happy to be here. Excited. Um, Very kind of the library to have me and for you to join us. So I'm very happy about that and excited to talk about books and stories and monsters and ghosts and all sorts of fun stuff like that with you.
Awesome. Well, likewise. I was finishing up your great collection last night and this morning, and there's just so much great stuff going on in there. There's so many layers. I'm looking forward to rereading it again in the near future too, because there's so much going on.
Right.
But my first question to you is, how does this differ from your first collection, Into the Void?
Uh, well, you know, I think it's just the stories. Obviously, they represent two periods of time in my writing career. The Behold the Void is very much my opening salvos into horror fiction. Mother, which is in that book, for example, was the first story I ever published. So early work and pretty much, I think, for the most part, pretty straight down the middle as far as storytelling is concerned. They're very much 3 act structured horror and thriller. So whereas I think with Beneath the Pale Sky, this collection is much more. I'm stretching a little bit. I'm uh, um, you know trying to tell stories a little bit differently. I wanted to try experiment a little bit more with some things. So there, but while still entertaining, which is always my number one goal with any story, is to make sure the reader's enjoying it and being entertained. But I think it's just, yeah, I think you just probably noticed that I'm maybe, using some different muscles, as it were, in this collection. So I really enjoyed putting them all together, and I, but but I still want to write, like, I still want to just keep, my write supernatural thrillers and that people find entertaining and can kill a few hours with. And so I think in that sense they're very similar, but I think that I tried a few different things in this one, and and also built on what I'd learned from writing all the early stuff. So probably a little bit more of a mature collection would be the best way to explain it. But I think it's also got a lot of the same bells and whistles as Behold the Void.
Cool. Well, it definitely felt like, your hand was definitely in these stories. I think there's a certain thing that happens in your stories that you do. I'd like to go into that a little bit more later. But I wanted to talk about the beginning of the book. There's a dedication to one of my favorite writers and yours too, Laird Barron. And I was wondering, like, how important are mentors and friends on this storytelling journey?
Well, they're everything, right? I've said it before, in other interviews and what have you, that I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Laird Barron. I probably wouldn't be writing horror fiction. So he was, a huge help to me early on. Just with both writing advice, but also being a writer advice. Avoiding certain pitfalls that he'd already lived through, and definitely like a shoulder to cry on, when things weren't going great, or when I felt like things weren't going, I didn't maybe feel like I was having enough success as I would have liked to have had at certain points. So he's been a good friend. He and I are buddies, and have become friends over the years, obviously. But yeah, early on, he was huge, and he would read a lot of my early work and kind of offered tips and advice, and then each time he would offer something that became something that was in my toolbox. You know what I mean? That was now in my quiver. So that aggregated, and also learning from different other writers as well is huge, right? So I think when it comes to mentors, it's great to have mentors, but it's also great to listen to those mentors. And I think an important lesson for maybe new writers is to listen when those guys talk, and take it to heart, and because they know what they're talking about. They've been there. So and I've tried to pass that along to other writers who have come to me for things, for blurbs, or to talk about writing, or for advice or whatever. I am always trying to keep an open door, as it were, and help out as much as I can for other writers, because I feel like it's paying back a lot of what people have done for me. So I think it's a good process. It's something we want to keep going, down the line, so that everybody can help, give a step up to the ones who are new and maybe don't have the experience or knowledge that more experienced writers do.
And that's awesome. That reminds me of this great interview I saw with Stevie Nicks a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Where that she was asked about all the supposed rivalries she had with other singers in the 70s. And she said, no, we weren't rivals. We were all friends. Those are my friends.
Right.
And I thought that was the coolest thing, because everybody thinks there was this big, kerfuffle between everybody, but there really wasn't. They were all kind of leaning on each other and supporting each other.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
definitely, I feel the horror community is very much the same way. And I don't see any other horror writers as competition in any way, shape, or form. I think it's definitely a community of like-minded people that are all trying to help each other, and they're all trying to find some success. There's a lot of readers out there, and there's more than enough content that we can create as a group, there's room for everybody. So yeah, I agree 100% that's the feeling I get this with the horror community as it is right now.
Yeah, and Barnes and Noble just made a huge horror section, and they need a lot more content.
Yeah,
So
they're opening up. Yeah, and I guess they're letting, speaking of Barnes and Noble, I guess they're letting individual managers do more of the ordering for their specific stores now, which is nice. So it's kind of a case by case basis. But like, I walked into one of the local Barnes and Nobles here in Los Angeles, and kind of introduced myself, and she was like, yeah, and she got on her computer and she ordered copies of my books right there on the spot. So that was very cool. Whereas in the past, you would have to mail the corporate offices a presentation basically, and explain how you're going to market your book. It was this whole thing, and like 3 months later you get a letter back whether they so yeah, so that was nice. It was a nice feeling to be able to walk in there like you would in an independent bookstore and kind of pitch yourself, and so that was cool.
Wow, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
they have
That's
a big horror section now as well. Yeah, so she said we're looking for content for our horror section. So
Yeah, and it's cool. And they have like I saw the Dark on the newsstand there, like the magazine, and I saw Black Static on there, and I was like, this is great. Like even they're doing weird fiction. I saw some independent titles there, and
yeah, and it's always fun to see your friends, right? Like, I was at the same store and I was like, oh, there's Josh Mallerman and there's Paul Tremblay and there's Laird and there's, they had all the, a lot of our, a lot of the kids, from school, as it were there. So that was cool. And yeah, and even I was in New York recently, and I met with the editor of Fangoria, and he was saying that they just got picked up by Barnes and Nobles nationwide. So that's exciting. It's more movies, but still horror is, as a commodity, is getting some good reach right now.
yeah, absolutely. And it's really nice that horror literature is seeing that expand in a big way.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. A lot of the stories in your book have cosmic elements, and they seem to be exploring those kind of possibilities. Can we talk a little bit about the cosmic elements in your stories?
Yeah. So cosmic horror is kind of like a buzzword, right? And I think if there's a theme to this second book, it's probably life after death. I focus, a lot of the stories focus on the afterlife, or on transformation, and yeah, I think this book is probably more aligned with cosmic horror than maybe the first book, although it's a very broad definition. So I do not write Lovecraftian fiction, but I guess I write cosmic horror in the sense that I write horror that has kind of cosmic elements, in the sense that I dabble in the afterlife, I dabble in this alien supernatural stuff, I dabble in questions of existence and what is real, and so there's a lot of that stuff in my stories that I think definitely makes people think of it that way, versus like a story rooted in like serial killers or haunted houses, or things that are more reality based. Mine stories tend to be based in reality, but then tend to expand into cosmic realms, which is something I passionately obviously love, because I like the idea of stories being sort of epic. I like the idea of having a lot very thematic stories that are exploring things like what happens after you die, what does your soul look like, what is your what does existence look like, if anything, and so yeah, so I really enjoy writing those kind of stories. I like operatic type stories where they feel sort of epic and big, versus maybe stories that are like based in like a high school shooting or something. I don't know, but yeah, so that's kind of my jam, I guess. I enjoy those kind of stories very much, and I enjoy writing them, and I enjoy reading them. So and that's probably one of the areas where I would say Laird Barron probably influenced me strongly, is because he writes such amazing cosmic horror, and he really attacks incredibly large themes and multiple worlds and dimensions and all that kind of stuff. And that's something that I read a lot of nonfiction science books and stuff like that. So I'm big into all the space, dark matter, multiple dimensions, and those kind of almost like pseudoscience-y, but really fun, ideas. So I like to incorporate that stuff into my work when it fits, for sure.
Yeah, I think in some of the stories, it's put in so expertly and interestingly that it's almost like a delightful surprise when it does appear, because they're so grounded. A lot of your stories are
Yeah.
so grounded. They start kind of almost literary in a lot of ways, and then they start to kind of expand slowly. And I really loved the pacing of that. And speaking cosmic, I agree. I don't see a lot of Lovecraft in your work, but I think that there's a much larger canvas other than his work for weird fiction. I mean, to me, a lot of your work was reminiscent of like Chambers or Blackwood or um, uh, 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 folks like that, or even Kafka in places. And but also it reminded me a lot of the sorcerers from like this, the 50s and 60s, Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson and Bill Nolan and honestly a lot of Beaumont, because they did a kind of similar thing. Things were really grounded, but there was this sliver of something really off. There was a
Yeah.
little peer of something like that you could glimpse in there. Were they influences for you?
Well,
Any of
yeah,
those-
I mean, obviously Ray Bradbury, was a huge influence. Richard Matheson, huge influence. Charles Beaumont, all those guys that wrote for the Twilight Zones, those guys were, and I love the idea of writing, a Twilight Zone type story. I love the idea of it being, having, being almost like a fun, like a 30-minute episode that ends in like, crazy supernatural tragedy. So, but yeah, and like even like Dennis Etchison, I mean, those guys, yeah, those guys are kings, right? It's Mount Rushmore of horror. So, so definitely influenced by them. I feel very akin to a strong kinship with some of those 60s horror writers, 50s and 60s horror writers, the pulp writers. I feel very comfortable in that world. There's not a ton of modern horror that I feel that strongly about. I just really gravitate toward that, swords and aliens and giant bugs and cosmic, adventure and also just like with Beaumont and Matheson, the trying to maybe bring maybe a big twist or turning the story on its head, a little bit. And that's something that I really enjoyed doing. And they're great writers, so Etchison, especially literary, and Bradbury, of course. So yeah, I like the idea of writing stories. To your point, I guess I like the idea of having stories that feel very rooted and very familiar. I want people to connect with the characters. I want them to empathize with those characters. And then when the crazy starts, they feel more part of what's happening. It's a little more impactful, I think, or I hope. So that's it's a bit of a philosophy I use in my writing. I don't force it, but that just tends to be the way it comes out.
Right. And I think another parallel that you've been, that you do so well is your use of suspense. Like the Wheel, for example, or just Wheel. I mean, I couldn't stop reading it. I was like 3:30 in the morning. Like I read it. It took me till 5. I was like, I got it. This is wow. What's going on here?
That's a wonderful compliment. Thank you.
Yeah. And I also, for me, I caught kind of a dark sense of humor in some of the stories, especially in Wheel. I couldn't not imagine the Wheel from 1941 from Steven Spielberg rolling off the pier a little bit at times.
Right.
And there was it was a little darkly humorous at times, unintentionally. Like when he said his ponytail is still there and he's like blown away or something. I don't want to give away the story to
Right.
people who haven't read it yet, but
yeah. No, I like having some humor in my work. I think it makes the darker moments darker. And there's a story in the new collection called Death, My Old Friend, which is the last story, which is really, in many ways, I wouldn't say it's a dark comedy, but it's kind of a lighthearted. It feels light, right? Like it's kind of a light, whimsical kind of story. But then when you hit those beats, those darker beats, it's a bit, it has a lot more impact. And And I also like to have fun with the visuals. I don't think you don't have to take everything so seriously. I like without giving anything away, but like in Harvest, for example, when you know when it hits the fan, so to speak, in Harvest, some of that action is almost funny, right? It's kind of like it's there are, but it's also like horrible, right? So it's like watching somebody get eaten by a giant chicken. It's like that's awful, but also super funny. So not that that happens in the story, but I like that idea. I like that idea of, because I want, again, going back on the same thing, but I want to entertain people. So I don't want people to be bogged down. I want people to feel like, oh, that like really exciting. So I do try and keep a certain humorous, I don't know if humor might be the right word, but some of a lighter tone throughout some of the stories. I think Atticus is another story where it's almost like a bumbling detective kind of thing. But then it gets like, pretty weird. So, and the bumbling detective kind of has this sort of transformation. So, yeah. And then there's stories like Symphony that are like not funny at all. So, where it's just a very, very dark story, and tragic and all that kind of thing. So yeah, so I try and mix it up, but I do like to keep it sort of light when I can. And I especially like visuals that are funny or flamboyant or crazy. So that people are imagining this happening and turning to their friend and saying, did you see what just happened? Or I just read this crazy thing. Alter in my first book is very much, it's very grounded in reality until it's not. And then all of a sudden it becomes this like tragic event. So yeah, I think it's fun. And I think I think the rug pull works a little better. When you're keeping people like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, that's kind of funny. And then, oh my God, what just happened? So I try and do that in my stories if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, uh, in Fragile Dreams, you do that. I was thinking of that while you were talking, where it's not giving anything away, where it starts out really kind of light, and this businessman gets off in an elevator.
Mundane, right?
And it's in Burbank, which I was cracking up because I always think of the Johnny Carson Welcome to Beautiful Downtown Burbank and all that, and people from LA like kind of, it's Tim Burton kind of ragged on it famously in his
Right.
other films, and then suddenly literally the floor starts dropping out.
Yeah.
And you really like brought me in as a reader, and my stomach was in my throat the whole time. I was like, oh my God, man,
Yeah.
that's what it would be like probably.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge is when you are writing something like that, and I don't think it's giving too much away to say there's an earthquake, and the majority of the story is what takes place after the earthquake. So, but you have to make the reader believe it, right? So I try and call it a writing tip for anyone listening, I guess. But something I learned from reading Ralph Robert Moore, actually, who's a great horror writer, and just a great writer. But it wasn't something he told me; it was something I just developed from reading his work. But what he's the master of is a pinch of physicality goes a long way. And if you can just have one moment where you write, even if it's one line or whatever it is, where you write something so physical that the reader is now brought into the whole scene. So an example would be if I'm writing about, a guy maybe patting down a dead body or something, and I would maybe throw a line in there where I would maybe like say he like puts his finger into the corpse's mouth and hooks around the jawline and feels the tooth missing. Something just, I was making this up, but something like that where you're just like, I can not only see it, but I can feel it. I can sort of feel the wet, icky thing or whatever it is. So or I just put your foot in someone's ear. I don't know, whatever the case might be. But I try and do that with Fragile Dreams was an interesting challenge because there's nothing, it's a guy motionless for whatever 80 pages. So I had to really find that balance of creating a very physical response to what was happening to him with the reader without it just without overdoing it. So so it's a balance, but I think it's something that I try to write very visceral language as well. So I read a lot of poetry. I'm a poetry nut, and I love hearing great words, crunchy, meaty words, right? That are just like, or phrases, like his knuckles were like boulders, So I just like the idea of that. So I try and use a lot of that language as well, which I think gives people more of a visceral response than rather than just reading about, yellow flowers and blue skies, as it were.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of language, you're also a screenwriter.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, a lot of the writers I've read who are screenwriters, their writing it's not as fiction based, but yours is. What is it? My question would probably be like, what is the difference for you? Like, how do you approach a screenplay versus a fictional piece?
Well, yeah, they're two. In my mind, they're two completely different art forms. It's like being a musician and being a painter. I really think of them very differently. Screenwriting is very technical. It's basically dialogue and action. There's no flowery language. There's no vivid descriptions, for the most part. But it's basically like all that stuff, all the visual stuff is the director's job. So you're just basically writing dialogue, action, dialogue, action, dialogue, action, dialogue, action. So and then once, if you sell that screenplay, then the studio people get involved, and then they hire a director, and the director gets involved, and then there's an actor, and the actor has something to say about it, and then you write this story, and then you spend the next 6 months to a year rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. It's too expensive. We can't have that stunt. We can't have that car explode. That location's too much money. That's just too many extras. So you're thinking about logistics. You're thinking about a lot more than just the story. You're thinking about, can we do this? Is it a visual effect? Is it a practical effect? Can we afford it? Blah, blah, blah. So screenwriting is really a technical chore. And it's also a very structured thing. There's not a lot of, unless you're Quentin Tarantino or whatever, there's not a lot of like wiggle room with screenplays. Producers don't want to read your 150 page, screenplay with images that you had drawn. They want a 95 page screenplay that is dialogue and action. And so when you're writing fiction, obviously you're writing prose, you're creating the visuals, you're creating the feelings, all that emotional stuff. In some ways it can be a little frustrating because I've written screenplays that I've adapted into novels, and I've run into a little bit every now and then where I'll have a line that worked in the screenplay but doesn't work in the book, because in the screenplay I visualize how the actress would say it, would deliver it, right? And in the book you can't really do that. It's just words on a page. So certain things don't work, aren't really translatable. But I much prefer writing fiction. I've had some pretty, mild success selling stories for movies, and I much prefer doing that than writing the actual movie, because I much prefer writing the story and letting somebody else go do whatever they're going to do with it. God bless, enjoy. Make sure I get my check and my credit, right? But I don't necessarily want to deal with like being the guy in the room who's got to rewrite it 400 times because, or because of budget issues or whatever. So, I've really been focusing on fiction these last 5 years. I did write, I had a Lifetime movie. I wrote a bunch of movies for Disney. And I still have, I have been writing screenplays. I wrote a 1-hour TV pilot based on a novella, not my own novella, but a novella from a friend wrote, and we're kind of been shopping that. And I wrote a feature based on one of my short stories that's been optioned. So were that to get made, I actually would write that screenplay. But for the most part, I'm trying to stay on one side of the fence. I think I have a couple of novels coming out, and I think if one of the novels gets picked up, I think I would probably be very interested in at least having a crack at the screenplay version of it. And then I would probably let them bring in other writers to do whatever they wanted to do. But I would like to maybe be involved just because of the novels. I think novels are so much more invested. So I would want to at least kind of shape it as much as I could for if it were to be adapted for the screen, I guess is what I'm saying. But yeah, it's two very different skill sets for sure. And it sounds like I'm patting my own back. I'm not. I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's hard to do both because people are usually good at one or they're good at the other. And I think a lot of fiction writers get very frustrated when they realize how much of how much of a structure, how much technical stuff there is to know about screenplays. And I think screenwriters have a hard time writing good fiction. So, but it does happen, and it's just, and it's helped me a lot writing my fiction. All that experience I have writing screenplays and studying structure and studying beats and all that stuff, and having a sense of story, really has helped my fiction writing a tremendous amount. I feel very comfortable taking a story from beginning to end, because I've done it so many times in screenplay form. So now I'm just kind of filling in all the meat potatoes to go with the skeleton, as it were. That might have mixed up that analogy, but you know what I mean.
I get it. And I think another thing that, if I may comment on what I would perceive as a benefit from your screenwriting, is I think that your characters are very well drawn and your dialogue is very well written. And I imagine like writing a lot of screenplays and thinking of you really have to kind of get into character development with scripts too, where I think with fiction, there's not quite the emphasis on that. And I think in all of your stories, the characters really are really three-dimensional and really alive and distinct.
Yeah, thank you. It's very nice. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen people say that a lot, and that's great. I mean, I don't know. It's not something I really focused on. I think I just, when I write a character, they really come to life for me, and to the point where I'm writing a novel right now. And I went downstairs the other day. I said to my wife, I was really frustrated, and she was, "What's wrong?" I said, "This character's not doing what I want her to do," and because she was just doing her own thing, and it was really frustrating me because it was screwing up my outline. But like literally, I was frustrated, and so I think, yeah, I definitely. I get very, very immersed when I write. I get very, very, very focused, and I kind of like everything kind of disappears, and I'm very much there. And so I think when I'm talking about people or characters, I guess, and people in the story, I think I'm describing them the way I would see them if I was standing next to them. And I think that's also like something that maybe makes them feel more real to people, is I give them, I like to give little details. I don't necessarily do like, she had black hair and wearing a brown jacket and, blah, blah, blah. But I do like to say, like, maybe she was wearing like, she had a duck pin, that she won at a contest when she was in 6th grade that she always wears on her dress. I don't know. Or, just describe like something about their face or something about their body. It's the old adage about like, don't give them a, maybe give somebody a limp or one eye just to make them distinct. That's an old screenwriting trick, right? Which is, give them a quirk, give them something that makes them stand out, individualizes that character. So I guess maybe I do that a lot with some of the people I write about in the stories, but also I guess I guess I'm sort of feel like I'm transcribing what I'm seeing and hearing. So like in The Wheel, when they're in that rocking Ferris wheel ride, and they're having this kind of dialogue, and you can kind of hear the squeak of the bolts, as it swings in the wind, and he's kind of talking maybe a little bit nervously, and maybe she's fidgeting with a scarf or whatever. So I think there's just little things like that that I can see and hear, and I put them into the story, and maybe that is why people feel the characters are more fleshed out. But yeah, I'm very happy that people feel that way. It's great.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, it goes back to really making you feel like these are real instances and you're really right there in the story with these people.
Yeah, that's the hope. That's the dream. So yeah, you're feeling like it's happening to you is definitely something I try and get across. I think there's some stories where I'm not so worried about that, but most of my stories, yeah, I definitely want you to feel like you're there. I think like in Harvest, I described like when they're all sitting in the waiting room at the beginning of the story, and the mom's trying to get everyone to eat these like lemon cookies or whatever. I don't know, I try and really make, I want people to feel like they're smelling what the characters are smelling. They're, and eating or feeling what the characters are feeling. And if it's hot, I want them sweating. And if it's cold, I want them shivering. And I don't know, but I definitely want to put the reader there so that when the fun begins, they feel like they're along for the ride,
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the other comment you made, whereas with screenplays, you're dealing with sight and sound.
Right.
And your fiction and a lot of the fiction that I see that I find unsatisfying doesn't, it basically, you can tell somebody's watched a lot of movies and read a lot of Stephen King and they wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
But they're not exploring the other senses. But there's a fine balance. You don't want to describe every little thing that somebody touches or smells.
Right, of course. Yeah, and I've heard, well, I've also heard negative stuff about my work. I've heard people say it's slow, it's too slow for them, or it's too wordy, or it's too many metaphors and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think it's readers. Readers all have a unique. Every reader has a different style that they like. And what works for one reader may not work for another. And one of the things that's been really fascinating for me when I wrote Behold the Void was how many readers had a different favorite story, to the point where at one time, this is a true story, there was two Goodreads reviews, one on top of the other, and one literally said my favorite story was X and my least favorite story was Y, and literally the next review was my favorite story was Y, my least favorite story was X. And I took a screenshot of it because I couldn't, like, it's just so some people want stuff that maybe doesn't get so character based. Maybe some people want stuff that doesn't get so into all the, maybe overly literary. I get the purple prose thing sometimes, but I like writing prose. I like writing pretty phrases. So that's what I do, I like coming up with cool ways to describe a sunset. As a writer, it's something I enjoy doing. So yeah, but a lot of people, they just want to get to the action, or get to the killing and stuff like that. So, but everyone has different taste, and different writers accommodate different readers, and I think that's wonderful. This way it should be. No one wants to go into a gallery and see one painter. You want to see a lot of different art. So so it doesn't bother me at all. It bothers me if nobody liked it, then I'd have a problem. But at least some people do. That's good.
True, and I think that's a fair assessment, and I think your other point is valid too. That not every one of your stories is going to be exactly the same, pacing and style. You know, like the last story in the collection is faster and
Yeah,
less descriptive.
yeah,
And I think as artists and creators, you're going to try different things on for size. It's like a musician; every song's not going to be the same tempo. Even the
right.
Ramones, had variations and stuff despite the.
Yeah, I mean, every story. I mean, one of the things one of the first things I do when writing any story is I I make a decision about about tone,
Hmm.
um, and that affects the prose. I mean, this ID, for example, is almost abstract in many ways. The way I tell it is almost more. I try and make it. I try and I'm trying to kind of screw around with your psychology, your brain a little bit behind when you're not paying attention. Whereas, yeah, to your point, Death Metal Friend is very much like, I wanted that to be quick and witty and light, and hopefully devastating. So I try and really, so that was, but I knew that going in, right? Like I wanted to, that's why I made the characters English because I kind of, in my head, it was like almost like I had this like, this British voice, for the main character. So yeah, I think it's and no reason, it could happen. The story could have been written, taking place anywhere, but in my mind, that's how the character spoke, and I think that's part of also wanting to keep it sort of whimsical. But yeah, every story has its own thing, right? So I think in Behold the Void, probably more so than in the new one, I think every story kind of feels a little bit different. Um, at least I gotten that comment a lot from people. So I don't know. I think there's definitely some different stories in Beneath the Pale Sky, but I think for the most part, they're supernatural thrillers. They're you know um, they're pretty straightforward. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, stories have their own. Every story has their own voice.
Yeah, and I think they definitely have a theme, an overall kind of theme. They're all kind of um, like you had stated earlier on. They're focused on what happens after death and that kind of final journey and the journey toward death in some places.
Yeah,
Um, it's definitely a very effective. I think the pacing of the collection is really excellent too because you start off with Harvest, which is I imagine it's a novella. I read it digitally, so I couldn't see the page count, but and
yeah,
then it kind of grows, and then it each story kind of piggybacks on one another in ways, and there's a lot of spiritual themes with some
yeah,
of the town like Sabbath and Gehenna and stuff like that. There's a lot of
yeah,
like um, tangents in there that were really cool. Semi, not I wouldn't say connections like, but they were in the same kind of feel.
yeah. No, for sure. And it's just um, yeah, you don't know that stuff going in. Sometimes that stuff happens organically. You'll run across something and you'll be want to expand on that, or you'll want to, go. Sometimes, I'll be three-quarters of the way through a story and I'll go back and I'll be like, oh, you know what? I would love for this to be more about this theme, and so I'll kind of go back and rewrite it a little bit to kind of make that to push that a little bit more to the forefront. And also, I think it gives the story more layers, right? It gives it a little more substance, and I think that's a little more memorable, maybe. So yeah, so that's something that I do. But then I'll write a story that's completely ludicrous and silly, so it has no thematic, theme whatsoever. So I just wanted to be like, and that's I guess back to my gravitation toward the pulp writers. As I sometimes I just want to write a pulp story. And sometimes I want to write something a little more, with a little more weight to it. So I mean, as writers, we need to keep ourselves entertained as well. So, um, we try and keep it fresh for us too. And that way, I think I think readers see that or feel that, that if you're having a good time writing it, they're probably having a good time reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested, they will theoretically be interested too, hopefully. And I am curious about your process because you had mentioned that, some people, maybe they want things faster, and some of your stories definitely take their time. I really like that. Personally, I like kind of the like getting into the bath slowly kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Um, as a writer, do you need like a quiet kind of environment to make that happen as a writer, or do you can you work anywhere? I'm just curious, like what your process is.
No, I can't. No, I can't work anywhere. I definitely need my my space. I don't, when I listen to music when I write, but I don't listen to music with lyrics. I can't. It's too distracting for me. I don't. Anytime I'm writing, and I don't want to be pulled out from that story. So I definitely write more effectively when I'm in my office, as you can see behind me, and I have some music on, and and I'm kind of in my space. I'm not one of those. I'm not that guy on the subway writing the novel on his phone. Um, I when I when I'm working, I work in production. So when I'm working. When I'm not working, I'm writing, because we do like freelance, so we work jobs. So when I'm working a job, I find it very hard to write, because I can't even, because I know that even if I go home and I have a few hours, I'm tired or whatever, but I just know that I'm going to have to stop again, and it's hard for me to go to stop and start and stop and start. I really like to, like I said, I really like to immerse myself
Hmm.
in the stories, and I know I have a different job structure than a lot of people. I mean, I think if I had a 9 to 5 type job, I think I would figure it out. But I much prefer to have like a lot of room, both physically and time wise, and so that I can really get into really let myself sink into the story. That's for me. It's much more effective. I'm much more effective. I can write a lot. I can write. I can have a 6,000 or 10,000 word day doing it that way, versus like a 500 word day, maybe doing it like if I have a couple hours at work to try and do something. So I don't even try. I just do it on the days when I know I can settle in and do my thing.
Wow. Are you big on revisions, or do you think like when you're writing it comes out pretty much how you want it?
No, oh God, no. I think it comes out. No, no, I'm making revisions. No, yeah, I no, I do a lot. I think, like, for example, sometimes I just want, it depends. Sometimes I just want to get it out. It's what I call my vomit draft. I just want to vomit. I just want to get everything down on paper. And sometimes I will go a little more slowly. I'll kind of like revise as I go a little bit. It kind of depends on like novels versus short stories, um, but yeah, for the most part, like for example, I wrote a novel that's coming out this Halloween, called Boys in the Valley, and I wrote Boys in the Valley in about 4 weeks. Wrote the first draft, and then it took me about 6 weeks to do the rewrites. So that was a case where I was just like, I'm gonna get this all down and get it all out, and I was just blazing, and I knocked it out like in a month, and then but then I went back and I did like 3 major rewrites. Um, and I frankly, I probably would have done another rewrite at some point down the road, but I sold it. So I was like, okay, here it is. So that was a situation where I didn't really have that luxury, which is a good problem to have. But yeah, not big on rewriting. Huge.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah, I also like to write. When I do my rewriting, is a lot of times when I'll focus on, I want to make this sound a little better. I want to make this a little more, you know, jump out a little bit more, a little more physical. So that's kind of when I'm reading, I'll be like, this needs a little more of something. So that's the biggest. And I'm the rare writer where when I rewrite a book, the word count goes up, not down. So I don't do a lot of cutting. I do a lot of expanding. Um,
Wow.
and so far it's worked out. So far nobody's yelled at me. So we'll see how that goes.
Right. We do have a question um, in our chat here. I wanted to get to. Hey Philip, the new novella Commodore takes place in the same town as the short story Soda Jerk. Is Sabbath going to feature in more work down the road? What appeals to you about basing work in this setting?
Yes, there will be more stories set in the town of Sabbath. There actually is a story coming out later this year in an anthology called The Bad Book that has it's called Marmalade. It's about a cat that can heal disease. And that takes place in Sabbath as well. There's a story in Behold the Void that I don't actually mention Sabbath. It's the first self-construction of a sunset. That's actually a Sabbath story as well. And then, right, so then Soda Jerk and Commodore. Commodore is a novella that's coming out in the next couple months. The limited edition already sold out, and there's a trade edition coming out. That actually is a prequel to Soda Jerk, which is a story in Beneath the Pale Sky. So Beneath the Pale Sky, there's a story where they go to a junkyard and the guy basically tells an anecdote to his date about like, yeah, they say there's a car in there that if you find it, you get in and you'll never come back out. And these kids disappeared one day. And so it's just like this little one paragraph anecdote. So I wrote that into into a 24,000 word novella. So that story about the kids in the car is what that story is about. So it's basically a prequel to Soda Jerk. But I like playing in Sabbath. I have a whole bunch of ideas for what I'm going to do in that town when I get a chance. But mostly probably more of a series of stories and novellas. I don't foresee a novel coming out of that. But yeah, it's a good place to return to every now and then just to do some weird. It's kind of a Twilight Zone sort of world. I like it. So it's those kind of stories are kind of what I like to do there. But yeah, definitely more stuff happening in Sabbath. There's a movie theater that's going to do some weird stuff. There's the sheriff that's going to get into some weird business. So yeah, so I'm excited to explore that world more when I have time.
Awesome. Thomas, Joyce, thank you for a great question. And I think that's a great place for us to ask you what's coming out, what's coming up soon.
Right. So I have Beneath the Pale Sky just came out, and then I have a novel coming out on Halloween called Boys in the Valley. It's my first novel, and then I just signed a contract this past week for a novel that's going to come out next spring, a trade novel with a larger publisher, and that's a big doorstop novel called A Child Alone with Strangers. But it's currently about a 650-page novel, so that's going to come out next spring. And then this fall, I have a poetry book of poems coming out called Tomorrow's Gone. And next year, I'll have a children's book coming out called Boy with the Blue Rose Heart. And then hopefully also next year, I'll have a third collection that I'm currently calling No One Is Safe. So a couple novels, poetry book, children's book, and then maybe a new collection next year as well. And then I'm writing a new novel right now that I'm hoping we can sell. And then I have another novel that's being shopped right now. So hopefully that'll find a home somewhere. So hopefully the idea is in the next couple of years to have 3 or 4 novels and a couple other, another collection, and then a couple other little projects.
Wow, that's amazing. And was one of those you signed a contract for near Madison Square Garden last week?
Yeah, that was the one I signed. Yeah, my agent sent it to me when I was in New York. So I was like, got on the Maps app to find a Kinko's, and ended up finding one right across from Madison Square Garden. So I went to the Kinko's and printed out the contract and went to a pizza slice place next door and ate a piece of pizza and signed it and then scanned it with my phone and sent it back to her. So that's that was really, and that's a contract I've been working on for I think almost a year. So it was really good to finally get it done. It was the legal process took a really long time, unfortunately. So it felt really good to have it done, and that'll be my first kind of big trade novel. So the one that's coming out Halloween is limited to 500 copies. So this will be widely available. So I'm excited about it.
Wow, well, super congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
And what an experience to be in New York City by the garden.
Yeah, right. It was weird. I mean, I'm LA based, but for whatever reason, and then and I had an option offer come down while I was in New York as well, for a studio to make a movie out of one of my stories. So yeah, I want to go back to New York so that, you know, whenever I'm there, all this great stuff happens. So so it was a good week. Yeah, for sure. So I'm excited about those books. I'm excited about Boys in the Valley. I think people really like it, and hopefully Child Alone with Strangers, you know, will pick up some steam as well. It's like I said, it's a big novel, so it's a big fun throwback old school horror novel so I'm hoping hope people enjoy it.
Cool. Well, congratulations and best of luck on all these amazing projects. I mean, just
Thank you.
there's so much great stuff happening. Is there any last thing you want to say to the audience before we wrap up? And I think Alex is going to say goodbye too.
Yeah, hey Alex. No, I mean, yeah, but thank you for reading, and I hope that these stories bring you guys some enjoyment and some distraction, and please keep reading. That'd be my message.
Since I have both of you here, I gotta ask, because you guys both read so much. What are you both reading currently?
Go ahead, John. You can go first.
Well, I'm doing a Gothic book club here, so I'm reading a book called Swamplandia, and also I have Wide Sargasso Sea on my next to read queue after that.
Nice.
Swamplandia, that's a Karen Russell book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's great. She's amazing.
Beautiful.
I've been reading a lot for honestly, I've been reading a lot for like blurbs and stuff. So I've been reading a lot of books that haven't come out yet. I read the new Fred Venturini book. I read the upcoming Josh Mallerman book called The Ghoul in the Cape, which is a big book. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. I just read My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. That was very good. So I got an advanced review copy of that. So, and I'm reading a book of poetry by Arthur, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it's S-Z-E. So Zizzy, I don't know, but it's amazing book. I've been really enjoying that. Oh, and I'm reading the new upcoming book by Seb Dubinsky, and I'm reading a book of nonfiction by Matt Carden. So yeah, all of the stuff I'm reading, none of it's really out. A lot of it's not out yet. So I'm reading for, trying to blurb things for people and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'm enjoying all of it. So I'm excited for all those books to come out. I think people are going to have a lot of fun with them.
See, I knew that was going to be a worthwhile question to ask for you guys. Well, as we wrap up, because we're right at 8 o'clock, I want to say thank you to both of you. This was great. Philip, as John said, I'm also a very big fan of this collection. I think it's great. And folks, if you haven't bought it yet, click that link to the right, buy a copy.
I have an image. That's the the artwork is by Francois Valancourt. He did an amazing job.
Yeah.
I was really pleased with it. So.
Yep, buy the book, click that link below, you'll get a signed copy. Go buy Ghost Heart in hardcover, because that book is awesome from John. And to both of you guys, Philip and John, thank you both so much. I'm a big fan of both of your work, and we love having you. We want to have you both in person when we can go back to doing that kind of thing here. So thank you both, and for everybody watching tonight, thank you all. Stay safe, everybody. Be well, and we will see you next time. Good night, everyone.
Thanks so much.